if any questions come up, just kind of pipe up with it. When I'm in presenter mode like this, I can't really see you. So you'll have to speak up. If there's a question, feel free to just jump in if there is one. Okay, so today and tomorrow, we're going to be looking at chapter 2. And today we're going to be talking about character strings, the print and print line methods. And one of the things in particular to pay attention to that is how it's all used with objects. So, Java is a nearly pure object-oriented language. It's not 100% pure. It's maybe 99, 44, 100% pure. But most of the time, what you will be doing is invoking methods with objects, and just right off the bat with the print and print line stuff, that's what we'll be doing. Okay, now we'll look at string concatenation. This is something that you've probably encountered before, but Java has there are some little gotchas here, especially when you start concatenating strings and numbers. And then with strings, you've probably encountered this also, especially with JavaScript, where there are escape characters that have particular meanings. And how do you do that? We'll look at that, variables, assignments, and how Java treats constants. Again, Java does not have the concept of a constant or a global variable, but there's kind of the moral equivalent of that. So now this is what the again, they updated. Oh geez. All right, oops. Darn. iTax made me update my, and how do I turn this off? They made me update my operating system, and now everything is all different, and it won't let me get out of this mode. I don't want to use subtitles. What the heck was that? That was some newfangled thing. I want the pen. All right. Okay, so the difference between print and print line, and again, the gotchas for string concatenations: define variables and assign value to it. Again, this is something that you have done previously. The difference is that in Java, because Java is strongly typed, when you define a variable, you can't just start using it. You have to say what kind it is, and then the constant thing. All right, so let's. All right, so this is something you've no doubt seen. A string literal is we just put double quotes on things. And so here are 3 examples of string literals. Every, say character string, it is actually an object which is defined by the string class. So remember yesterday we talked about how there are classes which are templates and objects which are instances of that. So each one of these, this is one of 2 exceptions to how to instantiate an object. So for strings, we can instantiate a string object by simply putting it in quotes like this. So string is a class. It's a class in Java. These are objects which are of type string. Okay, so and this is a little something, just from the book to emphasize what is going on here. You may be used, like in languages that have functions, they will typically have a function called print. And you just say print, and then it prints whatever is in there. In Java, they don't have functions. They have methods. And a method doesn't exist on its own. It only exists within a class, and can only be, well, an instance method. And the reason I'm calling them instance methods, later we'll talk about how there's another type of method which is associated with the class, but don't worry about that right now. Just say instance methods. Print line is an instance method of the object called, whose variable is called system.out. So system.out is one thing. This is one object. And then this invokes the print line method which is defined on this system out object. And in this particular version of it, it takes a string, and what does it do? It simply prints that to the console. Now, as an object will have, they say service. Basically, what the services are, or behaviors, are just the methods that it has. So an object can have more than one method. And those methods, which methods does an object have? Well, those are defined by the class that it has been instantiated from. So in particular, the system out object has, in addition to the print line method, it has a print method. What's the difference? Well, print line will print its argument to the console and then move to the next line. The print doesn't. So the print just stays on the same line. So as an example from the book, we can see that here there are 3 print statements followed by another print line statement and then another print line as well. So these 3, and then one of the things that's important to do when you're programming is to kind of be a scientist about it. Now, I mean, we're technically in the computer science department. Computer science is kind of an oxymoron because computer science doesn't really involve actual science. However, here's where you can be a little bit of a scientist. So what does science do? Science it takes observations, but when you perform an experiment, you are testing a hypothesis. And so your hypothesis is a testable outcome. You say, when we do this, then we expect thus and such results. Okay, so to be a scientist now in programming is to look at this code, look at your code and predict, have a hypothesis about what it's supposed to do. Okay, so knowing what we know about print versus print line, we would predict that 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff will all be on the same line, but then Houston is going to be on a new line. That would be one hypothesis. Another hypothesis might be the 3, 2, 1, 0 would be on one line, liftoff would be on a whole new line, and Houston would be on yet a third line. Okay, so which one of those hypotheses is actually going to be the correct one? Well, there's only one way to find out, and that's to run the program. And when you run the program, you will see, it's over here, that these were all on one line, but this print line here moved it to the next. Okay, concatenation, and this is something that you probably have done. The plus operator is overloaded, meaning that what it does depends on the context. So if you use plus with numbers, then it's going to add them. But if you use plus with strings, it concatenates them. So what is concatenate? It just takes them and shoves them together. Now, the way that the language accepts it is that we can concatenate 2 strings like this. So if I have 2 separate strings, then we can concatenate them like this. So again, let's hypothesize what will be done by this. Say we present the following facts, blah, blah, blah. So here's one string, and here's the concatenation operator. And so this will just put all of that on one line. Now, notice this. This actually involves a feature of Java which is not present in other languages that you may have encountered, and that's called overloading. We're going to circle back to that, but notice that you can invoke print line without an argument at all. So here we give it a string. Here we give it no arguments. That's allowed, but you can't just kind of do that. What has to have had happened is that the class which system out is a template has been templated from, which is the class is called printstream. You don't need to know that, but it has actually defined two different methods, both called printline, one of which takes a string as an argument and the other which takes nothing as an argument. And that has to be explicitly done in the class for this to work. So what is this going to do? This is just simply going to print a new line that with nothing in it. And so the letters in the Hawaiian alphabet 12. So here we've included a numeric digit within the string. Okay, that's going to be important. So again, what do we predict this will do? Let's just sort of, what this will do is this will print this line, and then there's going to be a blank line, and then this line about the Hawaiian alphabet. Now, here's the other thing is that the syntax of this is different. Why? Because up to now, we've shown concatenating two strings, but you can concatenate a string and a number. And what does Java do when it sees that? Again, and none of these are laws of nature. These are just things that the language, whoever wrote the language, decided they would do. So what do you do when you concatenate a string? You know, what does this plus mean? Remember I said context. Context is everything. So here we have a string and a number. What is it? What does it do? Again, it's not a law of nature, but what it does is it turns this number into a string and then concatenates it. So here, okay, and in the second one, it's like, okay, we have a string and a number. So what does it do? It will take the string, and again, we'll kind of get into the order either today or tomorrow. It goes typically on this, it'll go left to right because in the same precedence order. So we got a string and a plus, it will have a string, and then it'll add the number to the string. We can stick it in the middle. So we have a string, we can concatenate a number in the middle, and this will turn all of this into a string. Okay, so again, our hypothesis was correct. Notice the blank line that was that empty system out print line, and then here the numbers have simply been concatenated. Now here's the gotcha on it. The gotcha is that the plus is also used for arithmetic addition. You know, you've done this before in other languages. And what it does depends on what it operates. So if there's strings or if a string and a number, then it does concatenation. If both of them are numbers, then it adds them. Okay. And then the other thing that I mentioned is that the plus, it's evaluated left to right. So we have to force the order in certain circumstances. So here's a little thing on this, and you've kind of seen it. So here's where you can kind of go amiss a little bit. And something that you will hear me say a bit throughout this course is a phrase called programmer's intent. What I have come to believe after an embarrassingly number of years of writing code in a number of different languages is that the most important thing when you're writing a program is not how clever you are. It's not how, not how cool, what kind of cool things you can do. The most important thing is to be very clear about what your intent is as a programmer. And the reason for that is that if your code has any staying power, then it's going to be looked at by somebody else. I mean, if you're the only one who uses it, then who cares? But if your program is going to have any lasting effect, then other people are going to be looking at it. And they need to figure out what the hell you were trying to do. Why? Because especially in a program of a certain size, it is inevitable that it will behave in strange ways, maybe on certain corner conditions. Identifying these sort of corner conditions and exceptional types of things takes more time than writing the code itself, at least in my experience. Okay, so what does that have to do with this? When you see something like this, what is the programmer's intent? You know, so I see a string, and I see a plus a number and another plus number. So what is the intent? 9 times out of 10, the intent of the programmer was to add these numbers together and then squish it on the string. And now here the language says the fact that it says this indicates what the intent here was to illustrate that kind of gotcha. But in the context of writing a program where you might be doing this, and typically you might not be adding numbers like this. You'll be constant numbers. You would typically be adding like variable numbers. But in this context, the chances are that the intent, let me erase you here. The intent was to add the numbers together and then concatenate it with a string. The problem is that this won't do that, because according to the rules that we just talked about, this will take a string, it'll concatenate the number to the string and concatenate the number to that. So this will actually print 2445 altogether. However, so in order to make what is good about this makes the intent clear. And in fact, in general, when we talk about operator precedence, that's important to understand, but it's even more important to make your intent clear. In other words, don't rely on operator precedence, add parentheses to make your intent clear. So here, the intent is absolutely clear, crystal clear, that I want to add these together and then concatenate to the string. There's no other interpretation of that possible. In this first one, it is possible that I just forgot the parentheses. Okay, again, just as a check. So when you run this, you will see that they concatenate together rather than adding together as they were intended. Again, you'll hear me keep saying programmer's intent, and many times the way to make that programmer's intent clear are to simply put parentheses in. Okay, so just as a little test here, what is produced by the following? Okay, so what will this do? This should print X followed immediately by 25. This should be Y followed by 65. Oops, 65. And then, but this will be Z and then 30050. Okay, so again, the without the parentheses, that's what happens. So, okay, so now here's a dilemma. What if you want to put a quote in? Well, see, the Java compiler would get very confused, because if we just try to put the quote in, then it's like Java says that this makes no sense because it would say, this is a string, what the heck is this? This isn't anything. Okay, so if you want to print a string, you typically use a backslash. So a string with a backslash is there. And that, by the way, this where did that come from? The backslash as an escape character, that goes back to the C programming language. You probably heard of the language C. Whether you know it or not, you probably heard C++. That's the object-oriented language, or quasi-object-oriented language, that Java basically took over for back in the 90s when it came out. The backslash as the escape operator a character came up by the language C, which was developed in Bell Labs back in the late 1960s, and that's just what they decided. It's not a law of nature, but it just, ever since then, since the C language, as ancient as it is still around. Like, things like, Linux is written in C. Java is written in C. That's another mind-blowing thing. So C is something which is not going to go away in the foreseeable future. The other weird thing, this is why notice in Windows, the backslash is also used to delineate the file, the directory sequence. Whereas in Unix, it's the /, which makes a lot more sense, because when you try to bunch of problems. Anyway, so here are the escape sequences. Say Java escape. These are all from C. Java stole from many languages, including C. It stole from C++. It stole from Objective-C. It stole from Smalltalk. And a bunch of others. So stealing is good. There's anyway. So if you backspace, not used so much. Tab, one of the main ones. Tab is used a lot. New line are going to be used. Carriage return, not so much. The double quote, the single quote, or what if you want a backslash? Well, you have to escape the backslash. That comes in. This actually comes into play where when we will talk hopefully about regular expressions at some point. And in regular expressions, you want to display a backslash within a string in order to indicate an escape within the regular expression. And so in order to put the backslash in that regular expression string, you need to escape the backslash. So don't worry about what I just said, but we're going to circle back to that later in the course. Okay, so so instead of having a whole bunch of print line statements, we can just kind of jam them all together. So let's be a scientist about this and say what will this produce? So this will say, okay, roses are red. Okay, \n, that's a new line. A \t is a tab. So this will put roses are red on one line. The next line, it will tab over, however that is, move to a new line, and then now we're going to concatenate another one on the new line, and that will be left justified. Another new line followed by a tab, so that will be a new line tabbed over a little bit, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we can kind of parse this and make a prediction about what it will look like. And that is indeed what happens. So we see roses are red here with just a plain N, and then violets are blue with the \n takes it to here. The tab moves it over to here. So this is how we can do that. Okay, so what is a single print line statement that produces the following output? Okay, so what we need to do is in the print line, I'll just kind of do the string. What we need to do, okay, we open the string. We need to put the backslash for the thank you, blah, 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 right? All the way up to home. And then we need to move to a new line, another backslash, blah, 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 up to the comma, and then another quote, and then et cetera, up to the mysteriously. Okay, so in order to print this all in one thing, okay, we need to print the double quotes, and then we need to do that, move to a new line there. So And here it is. So there's that, blah, blah, blah. T. Okay. All right, so now variables. Now you've been using variables in your previous language. What's going to be different, and this is this can be a bit challenging, is that you're probably used to just, if I want a variable, I'll just start, write the name of the variable and start using it. Java is strongly typed. And what that means is that I can't just say, okay, here's a variable. I have to say what it is. So now what kinds of things they can be? There are two basic types. One is there are primitives and there are object types. And we'll either today or tomorrow, we'll look at what the primitive types are. Int is a primitive type. So with this, and so we define a variable by giving its type and then just a name. Again, that name has to follow the Java conventions. So and rules. So the rule is it can contain letters, numbers, underscores, and $signs, but it has to start with a letter. Okay, so that follows that. Now, this is something we can define multiple variables on a single line like this. This is something which I will not allow. So Java will allow that. It is, I have found it to not be a good type of thing. It adds extra space to your code, but it reduces the readability. In other words, it is possible to do this, but don't. Now we can give an initial value in the declaration, and this we generally only do in two cases. One is for local variables, and we'll talk about what a local variable is versus an instance variable. We don't typically do this, even though it's allowed for instance variables. We do typically for constant declarations, as we'll see. So now a variable is a variable in part because it can take different values. So an example of using a variable in the place of numbers. So previously we've been concatenating strings and numbers, but here, okay, we define keys to be an int variable, and then here we're concatenating it with strings, and so this will produce the following. Okay, now typically it is a better practice to separate the declaration of a variable with the assignment. Sometimes for convenience, it's okay to define and assign, but typically the intent is made a little bit more clear when we separate the declaration from the assignment. And the thing is that, oops, where are we here? What are we doing? In non-typed languages, you're used to just this being the whole thing, but here it isn't. Now, the assignment operator is the equal sign. You've seen that before, and now the variable total could have been something else, but whatever it is before is replaced by what it is now. And here's also where the gotcha comes in a little bit, and the strong typing. So if total was defined to be an int, and we tried to say, if I tried to say total is equal to, say, 1.2, okay, my intent is clear, but this is not going to work. Why? Because an int and a double are two different things. An int and a floating point number cannot be assigned to an integer. Okay, we'll get into that a little bit more. Okay, so okay, here's an example of just kind of overriding a variable. So we would just define sides here, and we say heptagon has 7. Now we change the value of sides to 10, and it's going to be that value, etc. Okay, so that should be fairly clear. Okay, so now finally for constant. Now, one of the things that Java recognized was that global variables are a really evil thing in general. However, there are situations sometimes where we want a variable, we want a certain quantity to be available to everybody. Okay, so that sounds like a global variable, but it isn't really. It's really a constant. So a constant is not very, syntactically, it looks like a variable, but it's not variable. A constant, what we will do is we will use the keyword final. So if I say final int min height equals 69, then the value of min height is 69, and I can't change that anywhere. Now, the typical use case for this is to prepend it with the following words, and you're not responsible for this yet, but you eventually will be. To prepend it with the word static. So what static, well, actually, oops, no, it's at the wrong, let's see. Come on. I had in the wrong order. So actually, typically, we'll say public static. Now, what does that mean? Again, we will eventually see. We've encountered these words before in our main method in Hello World. Remember, main was defined to be public static void main. So here's that same phrase, public static. This is where you will almost always find something like this. It will be defined public static final int min height is 69. So what this will do is this will allow every object in the program to be able to use this value without having to do, at least much extra work. Okay, so what is the utility of that? So one is that you don't want to, you want to avoid to the greatest extent possible sprinkling your code with magic numbers and having those numbers be kind of embedded within the code. What this, having these, defining something like this, or something like this, max load, means that wherever I use that value, I will refer to it as, in this case, as max load. And if at some point I realize, oh, by the way, max load is not 250, it's 260, then in the code, I can simply change it in that one place and it'll be changed everywhere. On the other hand, if I don't do that and I use if I use 250 everywhere, and I decide, oh, I got to change it, or I realize I have to change it, then I have to go in all these different places and change it. Whereas doing it this way, I can only change it one place and immediately changes everywhere else, kind of like this. So if it's used in multiple places, I can just set it in one place. And then if it needs to be changed, then I change it to that one place. And then if I have a value that shouldn't change, then putting a comment that says, don't change this isn't the best way to do it. If I make it final, then it can't. It literally cannot change. What happens to the, oh, I thought I had it. Okay, so a couple of next steps. So just make sure that you're clear about the concatenation rules for strings, especially when they use other values. The difference between print line and print, the various escape characters. Again, the main ones that are useful are the tab and the new line, which you've probably encountered as well. So keep reading chapter 2. And that is pretty much it. And then the main thing is that what you ideally what you should at least do by today. Well, let me ask you this: has everybody been able to install NetBeans and write your Hello World program? Has anybody not been able to do that? Okay, so you all have that. All right, so the next step on that is to connect that with Git. And there are two pieces to that. There's your local Git, which you set up by initializing your Git repository within NetBeans. And then the second is connecting it to your GitLab repository using pull and push. Now, there's a video about that. Let's see if I can, do I have that video up somewhere? Yeah, so what you will need is you will need to create your personal access token if you have not done already. There's a video for that. And then the video on how to initialize Git and push it to GitLab. That's the next one. So once you do that, then you will have completed the first assignment, and then you'll be all set to do the second assignment, which kind of keeps coming. So that's kind of the way these things tend to do. Okay.
Hey, sir, are all those YouTube videos like linked on the Sky site?
Yes, they should be. Let me just double check to make sure that I have done that. Let's see here. Oops, where are we here? Yeah, so in yesterday's, in the class 2, I put a video on how to push your project to GitLab, and then a second one on how to clone it. Yeah, and actually the link to, I think I put this somewhere, but I'll put this in chat. This is a link to, this gobbledygoo is a link to the playlist. So all the videos are on a playlist called CS2173 W22. And so if you're having trouble finding one of the videos, then you can just kind of go to the playlist. So let me show you how that Yeah, so if you click, that link should take you here, and that yours might look a little different, but it'll basically, the playlist will have everything that's there, and all of the if you notice that the recordings, the Zoom recordings, I'm also posting there as well. So if there's anything in one of the lectures that seemed a little bit unclear, then you can at least review that. Or if it was unclear because I said something stupid, then you can kind of identify that as well. Okay.
And when you said we need to push our file to GitHub, does that mean you should be able to see our hello world file from, since we added you on?
Yes, that's the idea. Is that, say, yeah, since you've added me to your project, when you push things, then that's how I'm going to get them. So basically, I will, when the assignment is, after the assignment is due, I will simply pull your repository, and then I'll be able to look at your code. Okay, so that's the, that's the main mechanism for doing that. The other reason for that is that in using a version control system like Git is the most popular open source version control system out there, and just in modern day development, it is absolutely essential. It's also extremely useful, and we won't be doing this here, but if you're working on a team, notice the fact that I can, when you added me as a developer, I can actually push my code to your stuff as well. That can, if you think about what the implication of that is, that means that if you and I were on the same project together, but working on the same program, we can both be working on the same program, ideally in different areas, and be committing. And what's the alternative? Sort of emailing stuff back and forth. That turns out to be a nightmare. So you can actually have like large programming teams. They all use Git together with something like GitLab, or you mentioned GitHub. GitHub is the is kind of the main, or it's one of the big ones for open source development. GitLab is specific to NPS. It has a lot of similarities to GitHub, but it's a little bit different. So just make sure you're pushing to GitLab and not GitHub. I actually have I have stuff on GitLab myself, so I sometimes need to make sure that I'm pushing to the right place.